Can you hear me in the back?
There's speakers back there. You're good.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Thank you for the thumbs up back there. Well, welcome. We called the Holiday Inn and said, we might need some more chairs. People keep telling us they're coming, and I think there might not be an open chair by the time we're done. We are so delighted. So, welcome everybody. We are so happy that you're here. We feel like we really hit it out of the park this year with the featured book that we have and the author that we have. We're very excited. I just, somebody's got to do the little bit of housekeeping items. So everybody knows where the restroom is, out the door, right-hand turn if you need restroom. Feel free to get up and help yourself to coffee or snacks.
Gale, your microphone is not working.
Does it work now? You might be sorry if you gave me a live mic. Anyway, would you please silence or turn off your cell phones at this time? We would really very much appreciate it. And many of you have asked if Mark will be selling books tonight. He is not selling books tonight. However, we will be giving away about 70 of the books that we had for library books. And so we'll form a line at the end and you can come up and Mark will sign your books for you. If any of you brought a library book that has the barcode on it, we need that book before you can get it signed. We have to kind of decommission it from the library. So does anybody here have a book from the library that they were unable to return? No, great. That's really wonderful. Okay, and first I want to talk about the success we had with our One Book Community Read. And 63 copies of this book we purchased. And in that short period of time, there were 133 checkouts. That doesn't include the people that went out and bought the book because they wanted to make sure that they could bring it tonight, or they just wanted to have their own copy. And that also doesn't count the digital copies either. So this book has really been scattered around, I would say, Belgrade and even further around the valley. And people have come in a number of times and set it on the counter and said, best book I've read in ages. So we're really thrilled to feature the book tonight. Because one of the topics that we talked about, we had 9 different programs that we did. Some of the programs were filled, and so we needed to repeat the programs. And we also, because food insecurity is one of the issues that they talk about in the book, 52 pounds of food were donated to the Gallatin County Food Bank on behalf of all of you, so we want to thank you for that. I would also want to take this moment. We could not have done this without the Martel Construction stepping up and sponsoring this. Hopefully you've seen their logo on everything. Well, while we're at it, Jason Martel, would you like to stand up and say a word to our audience?
I'm Jason Martel. I'm the youngest grandson of Adeline and Amo Martel and the son of Bill Martel. So just kind of put it in perspective. I'm currently the president of Martel Construction in Bozeman. We're fortunate enough to be selected to build this wonderful facility for the community of Belgrade. Looking very much forward to getting started on it, and just really appreciate being selected for that project. And this valley's been extremely generous to us and our family, and just always looking for ways to give back. So hopefully this will be a step in that direction as well. I have my lovely wife Shelly with me tonight. Shelly's born and raised in Bozeman as well. Her maiden name was Olson. Her father was Jim Olson. He was a longtime educator at Bozeman High. Some of you may have known their family as well. And our project manager on this project is another young native Gallatin Valley young man, Michael Daines. You might recognize his last name as well. So we got a good team for this project, and we're looking forward to getting it started.
Yeah, we're really excited. We're going to bid with this thing. Our bids are due next week, Tuesday. So we'll meet with the city planners and get the bids sealed up and select our subcontractors and get everybody on board, and then hopefully get some momentum into March to get this thing started. So really looking forward to it and working with your team, Gale. Thanks.
When they hired me 17 years ago, which, by the way, Chrysti the Wordsmith sitting here is one of the people that hired me and has walked the walk with us. But I remember walking into the library that we have now, and it was really in a lot of disarray. And some of the books on the shelf, and this was in 2006, were from 1988 and 1991, and I just kept, my first thought was, oh my goodness, they need a new library. And so 17 years later, we're getting ready to start digging and doing that. So this is such a dream come true for this community. You have supported us. I have to say, we're living a blessed life there. We have come to the community 3 times in my 17 years. The first time was for an operating levy, and it was at such a critical juncture. We had, the city had loaned us over $90,000 and they were tapped out. And they were kind of like, if something doesn't give here, we're just going to close the doors. So we went out, worked hard on an operating levy. We did not tell the public that it's this or we're going to close the doors, because that didn't seem a very good way to approach it. So we just worked our hearts out, and graciously that levy passed. And then a few years went by, and we have been and continue to be one of the fastest growing libraries in the state of Montana. And we again had to go to our voters with the police and the fire through a municipal levy. Some of you remember that, you voted for it. And that levy passed. And I have to say, you have no idea how those levies have saved the day for the library. We can just accommodate and work to continue to serve such a growing community. And every day that I drive to work, it's an absolute pleasure. So our heart's with the community here, and we hope that tonight we can give a little bit of that back to you. At the end of the program, like I said, we'll have some books here that Mark has graciously agreed to sign. We'll just form a line that'll come up and he'll sign them. If you brought a book, feel free to have him sign it. We're also going to have sitting on this counter a little feedback card, and we would love any feedback that you would give us. Just a sentence will do, but really, really would like to know if there's something we can do better, or a comment about your observation with this program. All right, and so the first thing I want to do is to introduce tonight's moderator, Chrysti the Wordsmith. So in addition to her 16-year role as trustee of Belgrade Community Library, which term limits now, we're going to force her to step down, and that's going to break my heart a little bit, but she will remain active with us. But Chrysti's also a house painter, a writer, an animal lover, and a very proud native Montanan. Her favorite task is writing, researching, and hosting Chrysti the Wordsmith, which is a radio series about the histories of words and phrases in the English language. She began her production of Chrysti the Wordsmith in 1990 at KGLT FM on Montana State University's campus. And now she is excited about the project as she was 33 years ago. So tune in if you haven't heard her. You're in for a treat. And we do have a couple of her books on our shelf in the library. And then as we move on to Mark, right before I introduce him, we had a dream that we would someday have a community read for Belgrade. And that was in 2019. And I had the opportunity to meet Mark's wife at a United Way gathering, and we made the connection that Betsy and Mark, and Mark's writing of his Beneath the Scarlet Sky. And I said, do you think, I know he's kind of like a big guy in town, do you think he'd come out and like talk to the people if we did his book? And he was so very, very gracious. As a matter of fact, at one point he bundled up about 70 or 80 copies of Beneath the Scarlet Sky and just brought them out to the library and said, just give them to people to read. So that is Mark's character, that's who he is. And at that time, Beneath the Scarlet Sky, how many people in here have read that book? Look at that. Look at that. And we were so excited to have him back. We actually submitted for a potential award our One Book Belgrade that first year with all the programs that we did and the turnout. And we actually received the 2020 Montana Center for the Book Award from Humanities Montana based on that program and the success of that program. I don't know if you knew that, Mark. Anyway, so thank you. I think many of you in here know that in 2015, we were honored with the Best Small Library in America award. That award came, that award came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well as the Library Journal. And it's things like this that have put us on the map, that we have library people from all over the United States drop in on their summer vacation because they want to see what a best small library in America looks like. I'm like, you like this one, wait till you see the next one. So anyway, so again, we are fortunate to gather together tonight to hear a beloved national best-selling author who lives right here in our own Gallatin County. Mark is the acclaimed author of 18 novels, including the #1 best-selling Private series, which he wrote with James Patterson. Anybody know who James Patterson is? Yeah. Mark has received numerous awards for writing, including the W.H. Smith Fresh Talent Award. His works have been named a New York Times Notable Book and a Los Angeles Times Best Book of the Year. Mark grew up in Medfield, Massachusetts, and he graduated from Hamilton College with a BA in English before working as a volunteer in the Peace Corps in Nigeria, West Africa. Upon his return to the United States, he earned a graduate degree from the School of Journalism at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and began a career in investigative journalism. Mark is an avid skier and adventurer. He lives with his wife, Betsy, in Bozeman, Montana, where he remains grateful for the miracle of every moment. And before I turn it over to Mark and Chrysti, I just want to point out a few of my staff that have really put their heart and their soul into it. John is keeping us going here. If you want to wave, I want to thank John. And Liz has buried herself somewhere in the audience. There she is. Liz has been living and breathing this book for 6 to 8 months at least, so tonight's a very special event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chrysti. There'll be she'll explain the format to you, and again, at the end, then we'll go ahead and we'll have Mark sign these books for you. And don't forget your feedback card. Thank you, everybody, for supporting us. We sure appreciate it.
I think we'll stand up, otherwise we'll be sort of these disembodied voices up here.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
Greetings, everybody. It's so great to see almost a sold-out crowd here tonight. Mark, thank you for providing a book for us to read, One Book Belgrade. It's just intriguing to look out there in the audience and think that probably a majority of them have been reading your book. We've all been reading the same book for the last months or so, weeks. I myself just finished the book a few hours ago because I wanted it to stay fresh in my mind when I talk to you. So I know that most of you out there have read this book, or I assume you have anyway. Some of you have yet to read it. And so that's good because, Mark, I want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, in a few sentences, maybe a couple of paragraphs, to synopsize this book for the people out there who have not read it yet, and maybe synopsize it for us who have read it and would like to kind of recapture the arc of the tale.
Sure. It tells the story of the Martell family and how they came to America. And when I heard the story from Bill for the first time, I knew within an hour I was doing it. And I had been looking for a lot of stories, through a lot of stories at that point, but I had never heard a story like, The Last Green Valley and the tale of Emil and Adeline. It got me so excited right away the second I heard it. And you will, if you haven't read it, you'll never read a journey of greater hardship and yet profound hope and faith. And that's what I took from it, as well as the extraordinary lengths that people will go to achieve freedom. And that's really what the book's all about.
So before we open up the evening for questions from the audience, I'd like to start out with a question of my own.
Sure.
And then we'll kind of let people raise their hands, ask you a question. And Gale, if you wouldn't mind giving me a high sign when we have time for 2 more questions or something like that. So Gale's the boss here for time. But when I read this book, and just thinking about it today after I finished it 3 hours ago, I was just so struck by the epic nature of the book.
Yeah.
The Martell family travels from the Ukraine to Poland to Czechoslovakia to Hungary, Romania, and Germany. And that's a lot of territory.
In a horse-drawn wagon, right, with everything they own thrown in the back, and they're pinched between 2 armies. That alone was, for me, it was worth the price of admission. But I don't know if you've read a book called Endurance. It's about the Shackleton, what they go through, and I equated the story in many ways to that these people just went through phenomenal hardship and covered just an extraordinary amount of ground, right? Just in the wagon with the horses. But then when you think about Emil, right when they're about to make it to freedom, getting grabbed and thrown into the Soviet POW camp, and he's further than when he started, and he has to make this big decision then, and he's going to run, and he goes all the way back across. When I got the sense of it, Walter worked with me on the map so that I would understand exactly where they went. I had to code the whole thing, and it was up behind me as I was writing, just so I could understand. And I'd been to all these places. I went and retraced them all. Some of it with Bill and Walter, and I'll talk a little bit about that, because I think that was one of the more extraordinary experiences for me. It was to go back to Ukraine with those guys and to actually find the ruins of the farmhouse that they start and they run with. And that was, from my perspective, one of the most emotional experiences I've had, because here are Bill and Walter, and we're standing in front of this root cellar and this well. And the house itself had caved in, but they remembered it. They went, this is it. And it was backed up on the plat plan that we had for this village. And to be there with them, to see like the entire improbable arc of their life, right? From abject poverty, subsistence living in rural Ukraine to Bozeman, Montana, and an extraordinary commercial success story, with their business. And Bill started crying, Walter started crying, I started crying. It was extraordinary, you know. And then that was up a horrible road, and I've been on some horrible roads in my life, but this thing was unbelievable. And we wanted to go to Poltava, where the prison camp was, and it was 13 hours up a worse road, and I couldn't do it. So we chartered a plane, and we flew there, and we get to Poltava and go, and we find, for those of you who've read the book, the museum, you know, where Emil lived in the basement with 1,000 other guys, and they're dying at a rate of 4 to 6 a night. And we get to the door of the museum, and it's closed for renovations. And we're like, no, we came halfway around the world to see this thing. And we started knocking on doors, and the director came out, and you know, he's looking at us very suspiciously, puffing on a cigarette, and you know, these Americans charter a plane, come in here to look at the museum, and he's like, what? And anyway, Walter is, if you've never met him, he's kind of a chatty Cathy, isn't he? Right? I mean, that would describe him in one way. And he just starts chattering, and one of the things he says is, well, Emil, my father worked at the hospital reconstruction, and he would take pieces of wood and sell it to the cooks to heat their food. And the guy's demeanor just went like that, and he said, my mother was one of the cooks. You're in. And in we go, and we end up in the basement with, you know, both boys. And the fact that Emil had lived right there with all these men dying around him was another one of these just extraordinary experiences as a writer. And for them, because the shocking reality of it was right there. And you could feel that there was something there that was just, we all talked about it the rest of the day. But being there when they were thinking that he slept right here, right? And he somehow lived, was just amazing, right?
So I want to back up a little bit, and considering that the vast amount of land and geopolitical considerations in this territory you're talking about, how much did you know about that area of the world before you started writing?
Nada.
Nothing. Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
And then to have to learn it all as you were constructing the story and then going over to visit, that must have been like a new universe to you.
Yeah, I mean, I had to read a lot about Ukraine and about the situation that was present in their lives. I knew nothing about the hole in the door. That was a stunning revelation for me, that Joseph Stalin starved 4 million Ukrainians to death in 1 7-month period. He did. They were part of it. They ate grass. Everything that's depicted in the story is real. And either I heard it from Bill or Walter, or I was blessed that there were 2 90-minute tapes of Emil and Adeline talking about, you know, all of it. I would have given anything to have been able to talk to them. But I really got a sense of them from those tapes and how they spoke. And but yeah, I had to learn everything about Ukraine and the fact that they had this extraordinary life, you know, relatively speaking, up until the Bolsheviks kicked them off their land, and then they're in the streets and they're starving and they're barely making do. Until Hitler comes in and, of course, offers them back their land. And they went, yeah, we want our land back. And they go back and they have 18 months, and the whole thing flips, right? When Stalin counterattacks and the Battle of Stalingrad rolls over into the battle for the Dnieper River, and then they're running at that point. Going to all these places is a huge help for me. You know, because then it's not abstract. I've been in the Carpathian Alps where where horses were going off the side of mountains and stuff. And I've been to the border of Moldova. We didn't go in because a few years back, my wife made me promise that I wouldn't go into, crazy civil unrest situations, and there was one going on there, so I didn't go. But we went all the way through Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic, and then Walter and I went to Poland, and I knew nothing about Lodz, Poland as the Ellis Island of the Third Reich, but that's where everybody went who was going to become part of this grand fatherland that Hitler had envisioned. And then Walter and I went and retraced the final escape of his mother and both boys, and it was another one of those situations where Walter remembered that there was this road that cut diagonally backwards toward the sort of no man's land, and we were walking along, and all of a sudden there was this kooky little road that went out like that, and we got out. And if you've read the book, they hide in this wood shack, right? This thing where they're a crib that they're keeping firewood in, and it was still there. I mean, it was like decrepit and everything. And Walter was like, "That's it, that's right where we hid." And obviously boards have been replaced and stuff, but and at one point that all those fields that I describe in the book. After the war, they were turned into part of the Berlin Wall and heavily fortified. There were dogs, there were tank traps, there were towers. And after the fall of East Germany, they tore it all out and restored it. So that it was kind of amazing. It was very much like it was when they made that final run. I mean, it was ag fields going about 2.5, 3 kilometers across, and we found the house where the shots were coming from, and a lot of that experience was informed my ability to write it.
That's remarkable that some of those artifacts were still there.
Yeah.
Well, I for one really appreciate the map that you provided at the end of the book.
Yeah.
That really put everything in perspective, and if you haven't seen that map, take a look at it. It's remarkable. It traces, the different journeys of different characters. I think now there will be some folks who want to ask you some questions, so I'll open it up for hand raising. Okay.
Did you ever get to meet man in the Iron motorcycle maintenance author, Robert Chrysti?
Boy, I wish I would have.
Did you all hear the question?
Was he an inspiration for you to write?
Yeah, I read him in college. I loved that book. You can probably tell from some of the ways I write, but yeah, Herzig had a big influence on me as a college kid, and I know he taught here, and I do have thoughts every time I go through like 19th and Main, because isn't that where the motorcycle broke down, right? So, great question. Yes, ma'am. Could we take a mic to them?
You bet. John, is it okay?
Oh, okay.
He's making a face. So if you could state your question, and I will repeat it for the audience so people can hear it.
If I remember right, there is a young woman that Madeline is helping.
Yes.
Later on, they meet up again in Poland.
Yes.
That was totally incredible to me.
Remarkable, right?
The question was, there was a young woman that Adeline was helping, and they meet again later in Poland.
Yeah.
It was so
So-
incredible that I wondered if it was even true.
It was true, and I futzed with it a little. But it was true that she was helping this woman, and then in Lodz, when she came up from the camp that they were in, and she went there at her moment of deepest despair is when that woman showed up. And I mean, again, there are things in life that you just can't explain, and if I made it up, people would rip me for it, right? But I mean, it didn't even occur to me. But it was like, oh, this is part of the story. Well, I'm going with it and sticking with it.
Classic example of synchronicity.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So, as a novel, how closely does it follow to the true story?
She said, as a novel, how closely does it follow to the true story?
So as close as I could get it. The two big things that were the challenges for me were about maybe 5 months into the project, I was talking with, I'm drawing a blank, she lives in Vale, Eagle, your sister, yeah. Shelley, sorry. I was talking to Shelley, I was down in Vale and doing a fundraiser in Vale, and Shelley told me that Adeline had told her that shortly, like within days after they went back to Friedenstahl, that he was building them a house and that he had to go to the nearest town to get roofing supplies. And he was supposed to be gone like a day and a half, and he came back like 4 or 5 days later and like really shattered, upset and everything. And he said that he was held by the Nazis because of course they had just invaded. They were only 3.5, 4 months into their occupation, and he was forced to bury Jews, okay? So I could have ignored that, but no, I'm not going to ignore that. That's a pivotal scene because she said he never talked about it again. But it was as upset as she ever saw him in his life. So I read and did a bunch of research, and sure enough, within 15 kilometers of where they lived was this town called Dubasari. And sure enough, in early September of 1943, there were like 9,000 Jews executed in ravines right outside the city. So I put 2 and 2 together. Do I know that that's where it was? No. But I'm assuming it was, and it makes sense because it lines up. The issue in the book about whether someone would be banned from killing, you wouldn't be punished if you refused to kill a Jew. That was true. I didn't know this before I started the research. So that whole scenario of what happens there, I had to make up based on what I knew, right? Which was he buried Jews. He was held for multiple days. 9,000 Jews were killed right there. It had to be, it just had to be the same situation. The other thing that I'm giving you the stuff that I had to deal with to put it together. So the other one was that when we were leaving Ukraine, we were in the Kyiv airport, which is so like mind-boggling now. This is only like 3 years ago where we were going all over Ukraine. And Poltava's been bombarded, it's probably in rubble now. But I said, guys, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that there was a before the POW camp a meal, and there's like the after the POW camp a meal. And I said, they said, what do you mean? I said, well, he spends pretty much his entire life trying not to be noticed, right? Because getting noticed in communist USSR meant you were going to the gulag. They didn't want anybody who was competent or could think for themselves. They wanted to get rid of those people, right? So, and I said, but then he makes this like wild escape, right? And he had all his plans for, he joined the death detail so he'd get a double ration of food. He was, he had the cart with the pony, and he was going, there were men dying every single night, and he would take them, right? So I knew all this, but I said, what is it that he goes from being this timid little man trying to avoid attention to, I mean, let's face it, it's not James Bond, but it's pretty wild, right? I mean, all of a sudden he just goes, I'm going. And he sets out on this improbable, insane run across Eastern Europe trying to go find his wife. And Bill and Walter both said that's exactly true. That's exactly true, but we don't know why, because he rarely spoke about the prison camp. And Bill said, but it's my opinion that he must have met someone in there who had changed his mind. Okay, so back up. I'm in Romania early in the research, and before I go to Ukraine, and I'm in this town called Barlad, and I always hire guides. I believe in the power of guides. They take me, and I always try to hire either a former journalist or a historian, because they speak my language, so they know what I'm looking for, and they can take me there. And one of the things I wanted to do, because I didn't have Adeline and Emil, I wanted to interview people who might have witnessed the Exodus. And I couldn't believe it. We found 9. And I did it, and the first one we go to is this guy, Georgi Vasilescu. He's about this high. He's 98 years old when I meet him. He's hale, he's hardy. He basically just like walks up to me like he was like, you know, the toughest guy in the world. And he starts declaiming to me in broken English and in Romanian with my guide about the power of bees and honey and all this stuff, right? And he was kind of this transcendental figure when I meet him. And I called Betsy and I said, I met this guy, you know, and he glowed. And I took all these pictures, and I swear to God that he's like glowing, right? And he starts telling me he outlived 3 wives. And oh, by the way, I was sent to the Battle of Stalingrad in summer uniform. And I went, wait, you were in Stalingrad? And he goes, yeah, I'm one of the last survivors. And I'm just in absolute awe. And he starts telling me this story about how he was in this thing called the Battle of the Elbow of the Dawn. It was, most people don't understand that Stalingrad was like a 950-mile long battlefront, right? With the city there, but also this Elbow of the Dawn place, which is where the Romanians were. And there was an initial bombardment, and a mortar shell hit, and he got knocked cold. And when he woke up, he basically knew, he just looked me in the eye, he goes, I knew for a fact that I was not gonna die and that I was gonna go home and become a beekeeper.
And outlive 3 wives.
And outlive 3 wives, that's right.
Mark, I'm so glad you brought this character up, because to me he was very compelling, and I think anybody who's read the book will remember this character. How do you pronounce his name again?
Georgi, Corporal Georgi.
Georgi.
Yeah, so when Bill said to me, I don't know what happened, Mark, you're just gonna have to make it up. And the character, and I went, oh, have I got the character, you know, to go in there. And that's how he became the transformative figure in Emil's life.
It was so great, because when I first started reading his interactions with all the family, I thought, okay, this is not a real character. This is a writer's device. It's like a coyote figure or a soothsayer or a seer, you know, that you get in classic literature that the world doesn't see as being very sane, but somehow they come out with these great revelations and truths. So I thought, you know, I labored under that impression for most of the book, actually till the end, and then I read that you actually met a person like that, and I was just so delightful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
He was very funny, and the last time I looked, which was about 3 months ago, he's still alive.
Oh.
Here's
to him.
He's a colonel, honorary colonel in the Romanian army, and he won the equivalent of the Romanian Congressional Medal of Honor, because he failed to tell me this the first time in the first hour, but he spent the rest of the battle walking through the battle, getting shot at, bombs going off, but he was burying the Romanian dead, and that's why he became a national hero.
Oh. I love that story.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a comment and a question. I'm glad you brought up the beekeeper, because when I read about him, I said to my husband, I hope you do a story about him, because he's so positive, and I love that character.
Me too.
So my question is, towards the end of the book, there was something that made me chuckle, and I was happy to see that. And I'm just wondering if it's true. Did Emo really buy a gold Cadillac and drive around Bozeman?
He sure
So
did.
the question was, did Emil really buy a gold Cadillac and ride around Bozeman in it?
With his fishing poles, yeah.
He had a red pickup truck.
Red pickup.
And a red pickup truck
yeah.
too.
I kind of wanted to piggyback on what both of these gals said about the coincidence of meeting the gal when she goes back, but also a corporate, I always pronounce it in my brain, corporate Yorkie. But anyway,
I did too.
they end up meeting at the prison camp, and how you say that you don't know exactly what happened and what flipped the switch from him post the prison war camp. I just wanted to say that I love so much that you chose that positivity, because it couldn't have happened any other way for him to have that drive. In a way, Corporal was his decoy, and how you kind of had him get caught for his however many times getting kicked out of.
By the way, that was true. He,
So
like,
how you brought
Georgi
him
literally
into it.
escaped 3 prison camps and was finally put in a 4th, where he spent 4 years and working in a mine in Crimea, and he believed, I said, how did you get through that? He goes, I knew I was going to become a beekeeper. So he just kept saying, I knew. Yeah. And I had never met anybody like him. And I was like, oh, you are part of the story, whether you like it or not, man.
So one of the library staff was curious about why you chose the Green Valley as a theme. How did that come about?
Well, Adeline did work for a Jewish woman I'm going to lose the name of the town. I'll come up with it. And she functioned as maid and cook, and the woman had I guess we would call portfolio of these pictures, and she saw it, she talked about it. It seemed obvious to me that the fact that she had this vision of where they were going and what they were going to find, and she never let, what we would call reality disturb that vision, right? So I said, well, she's looking for Eden, and that, of course, that is what she was looking for. But I remember talking with my editor, and no, let's describe what it's like when they must have gone there the first time. I go, oh, it's emerald green, right? It's just river running through it, and beautiful mountains all around.
Are you talking about Eden or?
Well, no, I'm just talking about what does the Gallatin Valley look like?
Oh, the Gallatin Valley.
Yeah, and then the next day they came back with the title. It wasn't my title. I didn't have a title. You learn a lot that sometimes other people's name your books, right?
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, Beneath the Scarlet Sky was named about 40 different things before one of my editors noticed, that phrase very early in the book, and that it became, and it was evocative, and it also spoke to the tone of the book.
That's interesting.
The same thing here was that it became like an icon. It explains, it stands for freedom, right? It stands for what everybody who comes to this country wants. So.
Would you tell us what a couple of your titles would have been?
What were
For
a
which
couple of
one?
his titles?
This most recent, the last week.
Oh, I don't even know. I think for a while there we were calling it the wagon. It had something to do with the wagon, right? Remember the wagon that she runs across the frontier? But there was a priest, I think a Lutheran priest, who said it was a little red wagon and wrote something. Remember, it was in all the material that I got from your dad. So I think when I pitched it, it was called the Little Red Wagon, but it turned out the wagon wasn't red, so that was out. Yeah, you bet.
Speaking of that wagon, the little wagon, I had trouble imagining carrying it around, putting it on a train. How big was it in your?
Yeah, so
How big was the wagon? She asked.
I've seen there are actually quite a few of them here in the valley. People have them in their front yards, many of whom came from Eastern Europe, right? And so it was about from here forward, it had wheels, it had a pull bar, and they had mounted a push bar, right? So it had 2 different ways to go. And you could lift it in it, but by that point they had nothing, right? They had nothing. And the other thing I'll never forget is going to meet Walter at your offices, and right outside what used to be Bill's office, there's a box, and it's a crate, and it has the address of where they left Germany, and it has the address in Baker where they're going. And Bill kept it outside his office every day. Yeah, that's powerful, right? It would have been so great if the crate was made from the wagon or everything, but I said, what'd you do with the wagon? I think it was falling apart, they junked it. But, you know, what an image when she becomes the fourth wheel. I mean, right? That's just mind-blowing. Right. Yes, sir.
Comment, I think, and a question. And the question would be for either you or Mr. Martell. Looking around the room here, I can feel sure that I'm not the only one whose family was pruned during World War II. Russian father, German mother, family. We don't know what happened to any of them.
Yeah.
What's going on now in Ukraine, and Ukraine and Poland seem to be always the eye of the storm in Europe. I'm wondering what Mr. Martell's father and uncle would be saying now about what's going on in Ukraine presently.
I asked Bill.
Did
that.
everybody hear that?
Yeah, I asked Bill, you know, when probably in the first month of the invasion, I said, what are you thinking? And he goes, you know, all these pictures of moms running across the border with the kids. He goes, it's my story. It's happening incredibly again. And when you look back in history, it's happened like 7 times, where a ruler of Russia will decide that they want to control Ukraine because it's the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. And it happened from the time of Peter the Great on. You know, it goes back to those who do not understand history are doomed to repeat it. There's a great example. Other people ask me, was I surprised at the ferocity at which the Ukrainians are fighting? And I said, no. They have a long memory. They know their history, and they know what happened the last time they were there. So they're fighting like crazy for their freedom.
I have another question from the staff of the library. So I told you who my favorite character was, or the most compelling, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was your favorite character or the most compelling. Which character spoke to you the most throughout the composition of this book?
Well, the great challenge of writing the book was to understand that there were 2 different perspectives on the story, right? I had to think very hard and long about Adeline. Luckily, she spoke English better than Emil did, so on those tapes, you know, you're hearing her more than him. So I really got a sense of her, but I had to basically fall in love with both of them. Otherwise, I wasn't going to do it justice. You know, I had to think of these people as like really good friends, people I admired, but also people I recognized their weaknesses in. And that's what is extraordinary about the story, is that they're not perfect people, right? All they are is people who are just trying to get to freedom. And their character comes through their action, right? The fact that they never give up. The fact that she pulls a knife on some guy who comes into the church after her, right? It's just, you know, and the fact that she makes this insane decision, right, you know, when she could have gotten shot, to run. And then you hear her talk on that tape about how if the woman who they asked for water at the well had given them water, they would have been killed or caught. If the guy in the milk van or wagon hadn't yelled, hadn't been high enough to see over the grass to say there's a patrol coming and hide, they would have been caught. If they didn't go by and run right then, the people at the outpost would never have thought that they'd had their papers checked by the patrol coming in. I mean, it's just like the most improbable series of events happen, not only throughout the story, but in that last pivotal moment. And that's what just totally stunned me about the story, because there was something guiding them in my mind, there's no doubt. They struggled again and again, but when they needed help, all these improbabilities start to come into play. You know?
Synchronicity or divine intervention, whatever you choose to call it.
Whatever you choose
And there
to
it
call it.
was,
Yeah.
all through the book.
Yeah.
So this book is full of a lot of danger and privation and cold and want and hunger, yet it's very redemptive in the end. So it really has a lot of contrast in it, and a lot of history and a lot of politics. And it must have been quite the labor to write. But I'm wondering, what was your favorite part of writing the story? What brought you the most levity or lightness?
I think when Bill had to take a leak in the back of the of the wagon, it was like my favorite scene, because you could just see this kid having to take a piss, and you know they don't want to stop the wagon, and I just had an utter ball writing that. That was hilarious.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'll tell you my favorite part that made me just laugh, and that was just a couple, 3 hours ago, right at the very end. So the story takes place largely between the years of 1944 and 1947.
43, 47. Yeah.
43 to 47,
Yeah.
where the family gets blown apart and they spend the rest of the time searching for each other again, and then the ultimate goal is to go to America, right? So they finally, towards the end of the book, get to go to America, and they end up in Baker, Montana. And I laughed out loud because I grew up in eastern Montana.
Okay.
And I know what it looks like, Siberia,
Yeah.
in February,
Yeah.
January and February. And
He did say that too. That is on the tape where he said, I went to bed in Montana and I woke up in Siberia. And he was terrified. What have I done? Right?
he said, what the hell have I done?
Oh, unbelievable. But you know, at the same time, this speaks again to their character and their fortitude. Within months, they've bought a piece of land. They're digging. They've dug a basement. They're living under the subflooring. And Emil and Adeline find out that Walter, who's working at this butcher shop, he tells them about the pig's heads they're tossing. And can we get them? Like, yeah. And she just starts cooking up a storm. And he says, yeah, in that case, I went to bed in Montana and woke up in hog heaven. And that's a direct quote, right? Direct quote on the tape.
That's great.
The book certainly captures the imagination of people here. How's it done in the rest of the United States? Has it caught on there?
Yeah, it hasn't exploded.
Let me repeat the question.
Has it caught on in the rest of the country? Yeah, it didn't explode like Beneath did for whatever reason, but it's remarkable how it's just keeps going like that. And it was named the fastest growing thing among all book clubs in America. It was just soaring. I just got an email from my Finnish and Norwegian publishers, and it's the #1 listened to book on tape. And I mean, I've always believed that the book has, like, its power is word of mouth, and it's going nowhere. It just keeps going along, and I get letters from people all the time telling me about various things. One of the people have questioned me whether Corporal Georgi was full of it when he said he got hit with a bomb and then woke up and knew for certain he was going to live. And like, what, last week? I get this letter from this woman who just finished the book, and her parents were ethnic Germans in Eastern Europe, and they came out, and her father got shot and woke up, grazed off his temple, knew for certain he wasn't going to die, and walked through battles getting shot at. She couldn't believe it. It was like almost her describing, you know, I had described what happened to her grandfather. It was amazing.
What do you think sets this story apart from other World War II stories that your audience might have read about?
Sure. Well, this is what got me really intrigued. Is, you know, it's ad nauseum the number of stories that have been written about battles and such, and you know, I've written some of them myself. But I was fascinated because this was a story that had never been told from my perspective, which was a story of people who were just trying to get the hell out of the way. Right? They had no stake in the war, and they were just trying to get out of the way. And then you find out that there were 60 million people displaced by the war. I had no idea. You know, I knew it had to have been big, but 60 million. And then when all the Eastern European countries and the Soviet-controlled countries, they expulse the Germans in the months after the end of the war. So now you've got 20 million ethnic Germans walking just like Adeline did, right? You can go online and see pictures. It's extraordinary. And some of them were pelted, some of them were abused. It was a tire of flip-flop. But that was the big thing right there.
Any more questions out there? Yes, sir.
I have a quick one. The Nazi captain, I'm trying to remember his name, was it Hausman?
Yes.
Okay. Captain Hausman, was he purely a fictional character based on reality?
Was
Yeah.
Captain Houseman a fictional character or one based on actual life?
There was an Emil Hausman, same first name. He was part of the Einsatzgruppen that came into what is now Ukraine. He was at Dubasari. That's where he was in his first shooting. And so they were in proximity. They were. And crazy enough, when they were in retreat, Hausman and all sorts of other SS guys were put in charge of protecting the ethnic Germans. So, do I have direct evidence that Hausman and Emil interacted? No. But were they within proximity of each other? Ooh, yeah. No doubt about it. You bet.
Back there.
There were a couple of very powerful women, Elsie and Marie, the cousin. Were those real people?
Yes, the cousin was real. The scene where she snaps after the death of her second child and she goes up in the back with the Russian soldiers is an actual thing that happened. It was the last time they saw her. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Can you say more about the character of Reese? I found her story before blowing off the train and all that occurred with that. Is that a historical part of that? Can you say more about her?
He was talking about the character Reese.
Oh yeah, I mean that happened. She had both her legs amputated when she fell underneath it. She was evidently kind of a free spirit, and that event just crushed her, and she never really recovered from it. She went back to Friedenstahl, as I described. I can't remember how many years after, maybe 10 after the war, when Emil goes, and she's there, and he tells her he'll get her to America, and she turns him down, which crushed him, right? He was just very upset about it. A few more years, so 15 maybe, yeah. But no, she was a real character.
So, Beneath the Scarlet Sky and The Last Green Valley are similar in some ways and very different in others.
Right.
What was your process? How different was your process, one book to the other?
Oh, well, I learned so much writing Beneath and researching it, that when I came to this story, I was like, all right, this is how I'm going to do it. I just had a much different approach, because by then I had learned to write these kind of books. Prior to Beneath the Scarlet Sky, I wrote mystery and suspense stories, as was said, by myself and with James Patterson. I'm blessed to be able to work with him. But you know, those kind of books are intellectual, in effect, games, right? I'm either creating a puzzle that is so intricate that I'm basically daring you to catch up to me, right? Or I'm telling an adventure story of some kind. But those are all exercises of the brain. To write these books, you have to access your heart, or it doesn't work. And that was a hard thing for me to learn and to do it, and to be vulnerable enough to write that way. So that was a big shift in my writing. But the thing I dwelled on was what was common among the two, and that was because I was getting bombarded with so many ideas of what I should write after Beneath. And I had to have a criteria, so I said, why did Beneath work and touch so many people? And it just dawned on me that it was inherently moving, you know, inspiring, healing in some ways, and transformative to many readers who have written me, you know, that they picked up Beneath when they were suicidal or deeply depressed, and it changed their lives, as the story changed my life, right, before I wrote it. So that's what I was looking for, a story that had those qualities, like moving, inspiring, healing, potentially transformative. And I heard all sorts of them until I heard this story. And it was like, ding, 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 there it is, all four of them right away, and I knew, right? And that's why I went after it. And I've kept the same criteria. It guided me to the one I just finished, so.
Yes.
So, when you spoke to us about Beneath, you spoke of a vulnerable moment you were at before you received that story. And there were obviously some times where the characters were very vulnerable in the Green Valley. Seems to me to be a bit of a theme, perhaps, like you said, something from above, perhaps. Do you have something else coming in the works?
The question was, do you have another book in the works coming up?
Yeah, I'm done.
What I want to
I
know.
finished it. So usually I start looking for a story, or I start trying to evaluate what I'm going to do next when I'm getting near the end of a book. And as I was getting near the end of The Last Green Valley, a very good friend of our family's died. His name was Alan Hayes. Alan, among other things, invented the computer mouse, and but more importantly, from a ski racing perspective, Alan raised more than 30 teenage boys who were trying to make the U.S. ski team, including both of our sons. And so he was like their second father. And we got out of having to raise 17 and 18-year-old boys. It was awesome. He had to deal with all of it, right? But anyway, this guy was great and became a really close friend of ours. And when he died, the boys were very shaken up, and they immediately went to Salt Lake, as did many of the other 30 boys. The very first boy, by the way, was Tommy Moe, who went on to win the downhill. And there were a whole bunch of them, and all of them very impressive people now, including my son, miraculously. I have to give him a little grief. But where was I going with this?
Your next book?
Yeah, my next book. So then I get, So I get this phone call because a bunch of these boys had come back, and one of them was a squadron commander of SEAL Team 6. He'd gone to Annapolis, became a SEAL, became a squadron commander, and they're sitting around drinking beers and talking, and Eric starts telling him this story he heard. And Connor called me up. My son Connor is also a novelist, and a very good one, and his book comes out next week, the second one. I got to give a plug for that. is great. But anyway, so he said, I think I heard you next story. He goes, it meets every button, and he goes, even better, it's in Africa. I used to live in Africa, and I'm endlessly fascinated with Africa. So I've been looking for a story to tell there for decades. Never heard one that I thought I could do justice to. So I said, well, what's the story about? And he said, well, I think you need to hear this from Eric and Mick. And Mick was this guy, Michael J. Mulroy, who was at the time the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under General Mattis. He also was a former ground branch officer, which meant that he was like a CIA James Bond bad guy. And also one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And Eric was getting out of the SEALs, and Mick was unwinding from his job, and they both went home, or they went home to Eric's home in Whitefish. And it took a while for them to come to my house, but they did. And then they tell me the story of these two 14-year-olds, a boy and a girl, who get kidnapped by this messianic warlord in the early 1990s. And they get turned into child soldiers. And the way they were raised in these very remote villages apart from each other, but it was remarkable that their parents instilled principles and values in them at a very young age. And these principles and values, which get kind of buried, they can never talk about them, are just in there, and they help them navigate part of it until they meet 5 years into this 10-year ordeal. And by the way, 37,000 children were kidnapped along with these two. And they meet each other 5 years into this ordeal, and they legitimately fall in love, and the power of love saves them. And it helps them escape, and they get out and they begin to work to bring all the other children out of the bush. It's one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever heard. And so
We
that's
give
coming.
you a big thumbs up.
Yeah.
What's it called?
What's it called?
Right. You know what? We keep referring to it as the story of Anthony and Florence.
It's got to have a color in the name.
I know, but I don't think we're going color. I wouldn't be surprised if when it publishes, it just says Anthony and Florence, because it's their story, and it's amazing. When you meet them, right? I went and spent 3 weeks in Uganda with them, and I'm sorry, but in today's society, people who went through something like that, they would be like, I'm the biggest victim there is. Like, the world sucks. And that's all they would talk about. And you meet them, and it's like you're meeting some kind of enlightened being, because they glow. They've seen the worst of humanity, and yet they find humanity in the worst. And that's what they talk about. It's no bull. They use these powers that they were taught as children, and they held tight to them in the worst scenario you could imagine. And their whole reason for being is so that people understand that if love is the most powerful force in the universe, then forgiveness and gratitude are a close second and third. And I never expected that to be the story, but that's what the story is.
We can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
We have time for 2 more questions before we have to wrap it up. So whatever is burning in your mind, your heart, yes.
If not for you, would the Martell story be told?
If not for Mark, would the Martell story be told?
Bill had hired someone years ago to do a book for you guys, right?
No, certainly not in the same way.
No.
I think he thought when he was calling you that he was maybe gonna hire you to just chronicle the story.
Yeah, that was the funniest thing. He said, okay, how much is this gonna cost me? And I went, no, it doesn't work like that, man. I don't do it that way. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Thought that's how it worked.
Yeah, I was like, it was all good. Bill and I have become very good friends. Yeah. Yes, please.
Heard rumors about movies on Beneath the Sky?
Yeah.
Did you say rumors about movies?
Yeah. Yes. We went movie, then we were going to do it as a 7-part television series, and then Sony Columbia started yanking me around, and they weren't making. They wrote a script for the pilot, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it captured what the book was all about. So there were these people that were kind of on the periphery who kept calling my agents in Hollywood saying, "Are they going to make that book or not? Because we want to do it." And at first, this guy who got involved with it, he didn't have a ton of experience. He was an Italian billionaire who made all his money in Texas. Don't ask me. But anyway, the guy is a cinephile and a big movie buff, and he's from Lugano, Switzerland, which is right where Beneath takes place. And they just kept pestering until they finally said, "Will." And Sony had to do this like a re-up an option, and I didn't like the deal. And they finally came and said, "All right, will you meet with these guys?" And I said, "Well, what did they say?" They said, "Will you meet them in Bozeman if they come up?" And I go, "No, I live at Big Sky during the winter. If they want to see me, they can come to Big Sky." Yeah, right? Because I wanted to see if they were serious. And 2 hours later, he calls me up. He goes, "They'll be there tomorrow afternoon." And sure enough, the next afternoon, he knocks on the door and comes in. And this is a great story. I just adore this story. Okay, so the guy says, "I want you to know who I am." Right? This is not the billionaire dude. This is his head of his company, film company. And he said, I graduated from the University of Maryland at the bottom of my class, like 5 from the bottom. He said, I majored in bong hits and beer. He did, so he said. He did. And he said, when I graduated, which was a miracle, I inherited a small amount of money, enough to buy a ticket around the world. Remember, these things used to exist. You could go to like 35 countries. Anyway, so he sets out around the world, and he's going to go all over Europe first. And he's read that if you're going to do this kind of thing, you better have a book, because you're probably going to get, stranded somewhere or wait for a train or what have you. So he walks in, and he walks into this bookstore at JFK, and has no idea why. Walks up, and there's a book that's called City of Joy by Dominic LaPierre. He pulls it off the shelf, and that's the book. He gets on, he starts reading the book, and it's the story of Calcutta and Mother Teresa, when no one knew about Mother Teresa. And he has a transformative experience on the plane. He lands in London, he changes his whole ticket, he goes straight to Calcutta, he walks into Mother Teresa and he says, I'm here to work. Pretty gutsy, right? And he does, and he works with her for a year in the orphanages and working with the people in the slums. And one day he looks up, and there's a guy walking around this like fine white linen suit with a Panama hat on. And the guy turns around and looks at him, because he's like, you're deep in the slums of Calcutta. There's not many white people walking around. And he says, like, who are you? And he goes, I'm Bradley. And he goes, what do you do? I work for Mother Teresa. And he goes, well, how did that happen? And he goes, well, I read this book, The City of Joy. And the guy just started laughing. He goes, my name is David Lean, and I'm here to make a movie about it. So he gives him a job. And they start working on it, and he gets into the film business, and the second movie he works on is Gandhi. Okay, so he's got me right now, right? He's got me, right? But he went on to describe how this company that they had formed were there to make serious movies, and they believed that Beneath should be a movie, like 3 hours, like Gandhi. And he just looked me in the eyes and he said, if you'll break with Sony Columbia, I promise you I'll make it. And I broke with Sony Columbia. And now the screenplay's being written right now.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you for sharing
you
your
so
book
much.
with Belgrade. I also want to thank the Martell family for sharing this remarkable story with us. What an eye-opening, wonderful book it is. Thank you, Belgrade, for reading this book. I hope we can do another one next year, so keep that in mind. Gale, so we have some directions for people who want books signed. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you again, Mark, and everybody. Thank you for coming. We're just going to form a long line probably. We will give out books until we don't have any, and if you brought your book, you might be here till midnight, I'm not sure, but anyway, so, be aware that a lot of people are waiting for autographs, so please kind of keep moving through.